So this presentation accompanies the other one. It's really in here I'm going to talk about particular patterns, and these are patterns of activities that students can participate in. I'm going to basically go through a list of things that you could use as replacement, perhaps, for the more traditional kind of lecturing that we use. Things such as curating, getting students to create précis or construct wikis, things like that. So I'm just going to work my way through the list. They loosely fall into two categories. There's sort of the learning and teaching ones, and there's the assessment ones. Now, for a lot of the work that we do, we still traditionally tend to do what we would regard as lecturing. I know that's not lecturing in the traditional sense for many of us. Many of us are doing something that's far more hybrid in its nature, but we still do tend to use lecture slides, PowerPoint, something like that. Well, obviously, in where we're moving to, we won't be actually able to deliver lectures in that style. So one of the ways forward would be to replace our lectures with narrated videos. So we can reuse the lecture slides that we already have, and we can enhance them with an audio narration. And when we do that, the best way to do that is to supplement it with a reinforcement activity, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, there are some tips. The literature suggests if you're going to do that, then you really want the movies to last about 8 to 12 minutes. That's probably 10 to 15 slides. And obviously these slides can be rewatched as many times as possible. So, putting a bit of effort into them to make them look nice is quite a good idea. So if you had a sort of 90 minutes worth of lecture slides, then, that could break down into 4 or 5 mini sort of videos. There's lots of places where you can look to actually enhance the look of the slides. And so you can always grab imagery or on Flickr, places like that. If you search for the Creative Commons license, you'll find images that you can reuse. The university also has a media library, and it's available from the URL. I'll put the URL in the Canvas site as well. So there's lots and lots of places where you can grab imagery to enrich the slides. Now, the way that you actually do this with PowerPoint, or if you're on a Mac using Keynote, is you use a feature that's built into PowerPoint. You don't need any extra software to actually enable this to work. You just go into the menu items, click on record, and what it will do is, as you navigate through the slides, you can record a narration over the top as you progress through. And what will happen is, at the end, you'll be able to export your content in the form of a video, which is going to probably be something like an MP4 format file. Now, you don't really want to save that file into the learning management system because it will be too big. So what you really need is you need a sort of media streaming server to put the movie file on. And of course, for a lot of people, that means using something like Google. So you could create a Google YouTube account, and in YouTube you upload the video, and then you'll get a URL, and then you can place that URL inside the learning management system, inside Canvas for us. Now, videos don't have to be public. They can be private, and if you elect for them to be private, again, you get that URL and then you embed it inside Canvas. Some academics quite like the idea of actually having public videos because it enhances your external reputation. So you could build up a YouTube account with lots and lots of your videos in it and use that as a way to sort of indicate your specialist knowledge. University also has access to the Microsoft internal stream server, and that's equivalent to YouTube, if you like. We have a far greater control over the content there, and to an extent it's sort of a bit easier to get the link through to the Canvas module. But again, there's instructions on doing that inside the Canvas module. You'll see the links that carry you through. It's the same process. So you record the video and then you upload it. Either you're going to upload it to YouTube Google, YouTube, or you're going to upload it to MS Stream, and then you'll place the link inside Canvas so students can click on the video and then they can listen to your recorded narration. Now, you don't have to create your own slides, and one of the skill sets that staff are going to have to think about encouraging themselves is this notion of actually curating content that already exists out there on the internet. A great place to find content is in Bob. We have access to Bob. Bob is an archive site for radio and television programmes that have been on the UK free terrestrial services. And you can search by schedule or search by subject area. And what's particularly nice about them is that you can get full programmes, or what you can actually do is you can actually create a clip of a programme. So you can say, I would particularly like the 3 minutes in the middle of this radio programme or in the middle of this television programme. And again, you go into the interface, you create that clip, and then you paste the code into the Canvas module, into the LMS, and that clip will be available for students to watch. Now, what's nice is if we create a reinforcement activity that goes along with that video or that curated clip. And what you really aim to do here is to enhance that notion of the student's cognitive presence, how engaged they are with the teaching material. So they would watch the 15-minute video, and then after that they would actually participate in some activity. And of course, lots of different reinforcement activities are available. You could get them to take a little multiple choice questionnaire, multiple choice quiz, so that could be like 10 questions that you set up. Or you could ask them a question and get them to reflect on that question in a discussion post. It could be far more ask them a question, get them to write answers to that question in discussion. Or it could be something far more in a sort of constructive vein. You could get them to actually construct a wiki or something like that on the material that you've supplied. Now, those bottom three, of course, if you do it in the form of a discussion forum where you're enhancing connections between the students, that's a great example of networked learning, which I've talked about in the other video. And remember, here we're trying to enhance that social presence of the students by getting them to work with each other. So what's the overall pattern of activity here? Well, you could have slides, mini activities, maybe a sort of medium-sized activity. On the other hand, some weeks what you could do is you could just have some content and then some bigger activity where you're trying to promote interactions between the students. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of those bigger activities that you could have. So what you could do is you could give the students some journal articles, some chapters from a book or some video or something like that. And what you actually ask the students to do is you actually ask some of the students to create a précis of that material, and they share that précis with the other students. So let's say you had a group of 15 students, you ask 3 of the students to write a précis, and then what they do is they set questions on that material for the other students to answer in the form of a discussion. Well, again, what you're trying to do there is you're trying to create that notion of social presence by creating connections between the students, getting the students to set their own questions. Now, if you repeat that exercise, what you can do, of course, is you can cycle through the students. So first time around, you pick the first 3, then you have another 3 do the précis, then you have another 3 do the précis. And you could actually enhance this activity by getting students to actually moderate the discussion. Get students to summarise the discussion at the end, get some students to actually steer the discussion, make sure that people are actually coming in, bringing their answers in. An alternative approach is, again, you could provide the materials and then you actually ask the students to create a wiki. So you could give them papers or videos or journal articles or chapters from a book, and you say, what I would like you to do in, say, for example, groups of 5, I would like you to create a little mini version of Wikipedia on this particular subject area. And there's, inside Canvas, there's a way to actually have a mini version of Canvas where students can actually create those collaborative wiki pages. And of course, after that's finished, you could then get the students to show their wiki pages to other students. Now, there's a lot of explicit and implicit skills that we're going to be requiring students to have in the forthcoming year. So it's well worthwhile thinking about what kind of initiator exercises we would like to use with the students. So, for example, we could have a discussion in the first week where we try and form those connections between the students, get them to present some information about themselves, maybe twin it with some work that you've actually asked them to do and then present in the form of a discussion. What's important is that we don't actually ask the students to do exactly the same activity in every single module, because that drives them mad. And again, if you come up with some activity where you're actually asking them to reflect on each other's post, you're tuning into that idea of network learning. I'll just mention, of course, that in Canvas there are lots of advanced features that you could use. So, you could actually grade their discussion. Now, typically you want to make this minimal effort for you. So you could just grade it as complete, incomplete. One of the advantages of grading a discussion forum like this is that it would actually appear in the gradebook. So it's a really nice and neat way of seeing the engagement of the students over time, because you can actually keep track of the little bits of work that they're doing, whether they're responding to things in the discussion forum. You can also do things like, for example, make it so that they won't be able to see others' answers until they've posted themselves. And there are other settings to do with threading and groups. So another big activity here, you could do a shared literature review. So you could give them some papers and you could ask them to go away and you could do the literature review in the style of the tag grid. That's from the Critical Thinking Toolkit. To make this collaborative and work online, the way to do that would be to get them to do it in a shared Excel spreadsheet. They could do it in Office 365, which we have through the university infrastructure, or Google Docs. What's particularly rich, of course, and I know that many staff do this already, is to use a case study. And there are ways of doing case studies online. There's a couple of URLs there that you can follow. You could give them the case studies to read before they actually come to the event, and then you could steer the case study, ask them questions during the event. It could be live in MS Teams, something like that. And there are lots of other discussion-based activities available, and they're at that reference, things like peer-based jigsaw, discussing the academic controversy, team them up into groups, think, pair, share, or that notion of giving them a sort of 1 minute presentation on a paper kind of idea. If you search for any of those, you'll find literature on those. So let's move on to assessment. Now, we're quite used to using multiple choice tests in assessment, but there are lots of alternative ways of doing it, of using it. You could actually get the students to create multiple choice questions themselves. And so in groups, they could create questions and then you could share the questions with other students. They could be marked automatically. You could use the multiple choice questions to actually generate an entire discussion in a classroom environment. And the famous academic, if you search for Mazur, you can find out how that's done. I'll just mention the ways that you can create multiple choice questions with Canvas. There's actually 3 different ways. Either you can just type the questions in directly. Now, that takes a little bit of time. Often we get publisher multiple choice questions associated with a particular book. They'll give it in the form of a file and you can import that file into Canvas. And this third way is actually really neat, and this is something that you could use with students. What you can do is you can get, if you structure questions in a particular way inside Word, you can run that Word file through a piece of software called Respondus. And what Respondus will do is Respondus will generate what's known as a QZip file, and that QZip file is the thing that you can then import into Canvas. That's particularly nice if you get the students to generate multiple choice questions themselves, because then you could run it through generate the questions, and then you can set it up so the questions are distributed amongst the students. Now, there are links on ways to do that on the Canvas site. There's a couple of videos that explain how to do that. Respondus is actually available through the university network. Well, one of the things that we don't do enough of perhaps is peer feedback, and there's an entire system available to us inside the learning management system. And what it will do is it will actually assign students to provide peer feedback on each other's work. Now, you need to be a little bit cautious about this because sometimes this can be quite challenging for students. So it may well be worthwhile trying this on a formative piece of work first before you move on to doing it on a summative piece of work. Sometimes the students feel like, well, we're doing all the hard work. Where's the teaching presence in this? So it may well be worthwhile initially the actual lecturer, teacher involved actually providing feedback as well. If you do this and you try it multiple times, one of the nicer features of it is that later on along the road of this process, you can actually get the students to actually be more specific about what they would like the feedback to actually be on. So again, you're kind of promoting that reflection. And of course, getting peer feedback from students, you're creating those network connections between the students. One of the biggest problems we have with students, of course, is they don't read their feedback. They'll look at the grade because they're addicted to grades, but they won't actually read the qualitative comments. So one of the techniques that you could use is you could reserve 5% of the marks for them to comment on the feedback. What did I learn on my feedback? What will I do better next time? Now, you don't want to turn this into a massive marking exercise, so often the best way to do it is just to either sort of give them the 5% if they do it, or if they don't do it, give them 0. You want something that's quite simple. What you don't want to do, particularly if we have a massive module, is turn it into a massive marking exercise. So that's a quick sort of run through various different activities. Now, obviously, there are loads more out there on the internet. And what we'll try and do is we'll try and find all the evidence of good practice that we find amongst all the different modules, and we'll share those around. I'll just return back to the two key principles that you should always try and think about when you're designing your online activities, which are those notion of presences, which we've derived from the community of inquiry model. Always think about, where am I? Where's the teaching presence in these activities? Because you have to be present to an extent. Cognitive presence, well, that's the kind of thing that we're hoping to address all the time with critical thinking and reflection. But of course, social presence is the hard bit. So if we can build activities where the students are working with each other, then hopefully as a side effect, we'll get that feeling of community, that feeling of social presence. And the way that we're advocating doing that, of course, is using network learning. It's nice and simple. Just try and create as many connections between the students as you can.